Yeah, and well, that absolutely paid off for you, earning yourself a top eight in that Pro Tour, having mastered that deck. I can say I played the same thing. I not was not much of a modern player and picked up a deck with barely a week or two experience on it, and not too many games. I played Belcher, and I think suffered from not having that deep deck mastery, even though he came up with a quite a different list. Actually, if you we won't well we won't have to see now, but Nick Cosgrove's Belcher list that he brought today is quite different than the stock one. Not playing any Flare of Denials or those creatures that look for like no Thundertrap Trainer or Philology Archaeologist, playing a different build of the deck, but it's still Belcher in the same way. But yeah, so getting back into our feature match, we have Aidan playing Boros, going to be on the play, which is quite huge in this matchup. Would you say?
Yeah, we've talked about it all weekend, and we'll continue to talk about it. And one of the the big appeals of having the being that player who got that win in, neither them, but Aiden with great breakers being in third place. These games are so fast, and the less turns a game plays out, generally, the more important that being on the play is. If the games are over by turn three, turn four, which we're seeing a lot of, and this is a matchup that is pretty tough for Boros Energy in game one. Aiden's list only playing one Blood Moon, a card that is normally played in higher numbers. You're seeing oftentimes two, sometimes three copies in the main deck. So to get a chance to kind of steal this game one, which is really how it sometimes feels when Boros wins these game ones against these combo decks, he's going to need a very fast start.
Yes, he has two more Blood Moons that'll come for the post-4 games, but as of right now, only access to one. Guide of Soul's a good start. We'll see what he can follow it up with, but even if he has the best possible start, we've seen, even in this tournament, Dominic Harvey win a game on, was it turn two or turn three? It might have been turn three, might have been turn two, I'm not sure, but this Amulet Titan is capable of winning so quickly that even going second against maybe the best Boros Energy draw, if Dom has the best his best hand, then he will certainly be able to recognize that he has the kill and pilot it out. As we see, he does start with an Amulet of Vigor, which is obviously exactly what he wants to open the game.
Yeah, Amulet of Vigor is, it's the namesake part of the deck. There are not a lot of answers to that are afforded to Aiden Mirabelli. In the list, it looks like it's just the one of Static Prison, which maybe I'm getting a glance at being in the hand as a potential answer to the Amulet. But apart from that, there's nothing. And Aiden needs to do kind of that double duty where you want to be interacting as well as you can with the Amulet Titan combo, but you also need some level of speed and enough kind of pressure to not let the Amulet Titan deck just get time. Because if the Amulet Titan deck can make a few land drops, even if you have tons of power, it's still not enough because they can just the deck is the reason it's such a powerhouse in the format. It's very strong, it's very resilient. But we'll see what Aiden's got to follow up this Guide of Souls.
An Ocelot Pride, ideal. And another Ocelot Pride, and this is exactly what he needs, barring a Ragavan. This is the ideal Boros Energy start. No sweepers, of course, in game one for Dom, so this is going to go completely crazy.
Yeah, and with this incredibly fast clock, this is about as fast as it can go. No Blood Moon for Aiden, but this is an unbelievable turn two. This is right here is easily presenting a lethal threat by turn four, potentially turn three with a Goblin Bombardment into the mix. But Dom needs to just kind of cross his fingers and try to plan for some way to win the game on turn three, because I would be shocked if he untaps on a fourth turn.
Yeah, there's no way. On the next turn, Aiden, if he has any some sort of follow up, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, he'll get the City's Blessing even with nothing else, but or
just one
with
land
at least
gets
a
City's
land.
Blessing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but if he has any reasonable turn, he will have the City's Blessing for both of the Ocelot Prides, and that will create so many tokens that you're absolutely right. There is no chance that Dom survives to make it to a turn 4. So Dom, as we see, this Malevolent Rebel being cast, choosing a Spelunking, not exactly what he needs, because he just needs to go so fast, and already having an Amulet, a Spelunking does not help.
It does not, and Dom has a 0-1 blocker that is really not going to change much. Maybe even gets removed by Aidan to take him off any amount of mana. But you got to assume that this, with any reasonable amount of follow-up, Aidan will be presenting the kill, and Dom getting a Spelunking doesn't really generate much mana once you already have the Amulet in play. You're looking for basically that second Amulet is what Dom's looking for. Maybe a land into Escape Shift to get some Lotus Fields to get up a ton of mana, but right now it's looking very tough for the Amulet Titan player, assuming Aidan has that Static Prison, which I believe he does.
If that is, that would be, I mean, at least Spelunking would be able to kind of replay the and it is Static Prison, wow. So the Spelunking will be able to cover the Amulet effect, but that's at most one copy. You're absolutely right. Dom's going to need 2 copies of Amulet if he's going to win on the next turn, and not only does he not have that, he needs to spend 3 mana playing his first copy if he only has the Spelunking.
Yeah, it's looking Dom, at least the only saving grace will be that this Eldrazi spawn is going to stay in play. I think his out to win needs to involve something like Amulet of Vigor into Crumbling Vestige to make green mana, into Sack the Spawn to get the ability to cast Scape Shift away the 3 lands, and hopefully has enough follow-up there with what he has in hand, but it's going to take a very tall task, and because of Dom didn't play that second Amulet last turn, you got to think it's not in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see not enough tokens in the room to create an all those cats. So we see a dice of 6 cat tokens being created on the end step. That is, I believe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So only the second Ocelot Pride had the City's Blessing. The first one did not, and that's why we have 6 being created. But that's still a huge number. And with the Guide of Souls getting up an additional 6 energy, we'll be able to give another creature flying, which means that, Dom, the scenario is coming true where Dom needs to win the game this turn.
Yeah, and you could see that the head on the hand with Dom Harvey, not exactly the posturing of someone who has the kill here. Maybe he has the perfect cards and is just trying to play around something from Aidan, maybe seeing if he can play around a Galvanic Discharge or maybe a Thraben Charm. But in reality, you got to, and if you're Dom, you can even be concerned that Aidan didn't tap those last 2 mana. Good chance there's more interaction to follow it up. But looks like a Spelunking is going to get cast.
Yeah, and at this point, a Galvanic Discharge and would be able to take out a Primeval Titan on its own with so much energy created. But yeah, then there we go. It ends right on the spot.
And when you think about this matchup, this is one that is just Boros gets so much post-board in more Blood Moons and answers to Urza Saga and answers to Amulet of Vigor. So when you're Aidan, getting to get that game 1 has to feel incredible.
Absolutely. There we go. We do see even the surgical extractions in a sideboard that might come up and might be able to interrupt a Scape Shift combo if a Dom is trying to go for that. So that's and even the Orum's chance. So he gets so many ways to interrupt what Dom is doing that he could break up any of Dom's fastest starts.
Yeah, Aidan's list is, game 1 is not the most respectful for Titan, but post board it very much is. And, you got to think you're in a tough spot being Dom Harvey to win 2 games in this post board configuration. Hopefully he's got some good tools to maybe, some Pyroclasms we can see are going to be huge from his end to just be able to sweep up some of these cheap creatures. And in these games that are, these post board games are going to go longer. You aren't going to get, hopefully for Aidan, these incredibly fast starts. You've got to think they're both able to interact with each other a little bit better. So these games are going to go longer, and hopefully Dom can kind of leverage that on his side to, have some removal spells, to have some more grindy threats, and angle himself better for the post board game.
Well, I will never count out Dom Harvey in a match gathering, but as you say, Aidan's list less respectful of Amulet Titan than maybe some others. Well, it doesn't matter. If you have Guide of Souls and Ocelot Pride, well, I mean, in this game, the Static Prison was quite big, and the other tools that he could have thrown into the mix to interrupt what Dom was trying to set up. But really that's the core strength of the Boros Energy deck, is that it has a bunch of on paper bad matchups. Amulet Titan, a bad matchup for Boros Energy on paper, but every game you have a chance. You can just explode onto the board and do something that no deck in the format can keep up with without a sweeper in that spot.
Yeah, we call these decks the, Boros Energy, even like the Simic Birthing Ritual deck that we're getting to see a lot of in this tournament. We call them fair decks, but the fair is really in quotation marks because there is nothing fair about Guide of Souls into Ocelot Pride. There's nothing fair about Ragavan into a turn 2 Blood Moon. Nothing fair about a Johnny Goblin Bombardment. Even these decks that are the quote unquote mid range decks of the format, Jeskai Blink, same thing with, Riddler Ephemerate, these are not fair interactions. And to compete with these incredibly fast combo decks that are attacking you from so many different angles, you can't just afford to only be answering their stuff because you're going to play against Amulet. You'll play against Storm. They're all trying to do different things. And at the end of the day, you just need to be able to provide a clock. And if you catch them stumbling at all, you can put the game away very quickly.
Yeah, and from Dom's side, we do see, as you mentioned, the Pyroclasms improving, but he also has a Dismember, so a well-timed Dismember would have really slowed down Aidan in that other game. And as we jump over to our backup feature match, Eduardo Gallic on the Simic Birthing Ritual deck, playing against Gavin Bennett on Affinity, and this spot looks absolutely amazing for Gavin. 2 Kappa Cannoneers in play, 3 munitions tokens with an engineered explosives, just against 2 lowly 1/1s. I mean, this one, feels like could reach a conclusion soon as well.
You have to assume so. These Kappa Cannoneers, this Simic Birthing Ritual deck puts in a lot of crappy blockers that are sometimes great with dealing with these large creatures, but you've got to imagine it's a very tough time to see that against the face of any artifact, gives them unblockable, grows them a bunch. There's an engineered explosive in play as well, and as powerful as Fibblethip the Lost is, it's not exactly looking like it's going to be able to compete, and Eduardo quickly picks up the cards.
Yeah, and we saw, well, we didn't get to see it because the Kappa Cannoneers alone were probably enough to take the job down, but Engineered Explosives being one of the cards that Izzet Affinity played, even before they adopted weapons manufacturing, just as a 0 mana artifact that sometimes does something, now they do so much more when you can sacrifice it for 2 mana to destroy all your munitions tokens.
And this is a matchup we've seen before. We talk about this being one of these kind of prototypical tough matchups for the Simic Birthing Ritual deck. But Eduardo gets some good tools of the sideboard. What is he working with here?
Yeah, well, as we saw Eduardo earlier in the tournament make that play of evoke the subtlety into use it to flare to counter a Kappa Cannoneer, I believe it was, but that's just some of the things he gets to do. But in terms of sideboard cards, there are those 3 Force of Vigors, which are totally key against Urza Saga, weapons manufacturing, and the Affinity deck as a whole, as well as the Mystical Disputes that we know he'll be boarding in. Dispute being able to hit that Kappa Cannoneer as it attempts to come down.
Yeah, it's one of those matchups there. It's very tough for the Simic Birthing Ritual deck. The interaction you have does not line up super well against these big cards like Kappa Cannoneer. It doesn't line up super well game 1 against Urza Saga, but post board you have a lot more tools, and you got to hope that Eduardo can take this game 2, and then maybe looking at potential game 3. Obviously, don't want to get too ahead of it. He's got 3 Gemstone Caverns in the sideboard to steal the play in some of these matchups where it's so incredibly important to be fast, and you're willing to give up some cards for that velocity, which is kind of a hallmark of the Simic Birthing Ritual deck, packed with cards like Subtlety and Force of Negation. It's all about getting rid of cards to exchange for tempo because all of your cards replace themselves or more.
Yeah, and from Gavin's side, we saw he only has 1 Mystical Dispute in his sideboard, but has supplemented it with 2 copies of Force Negations. So a different mix of interaction, and it'll be interesting to see how he actually chooses to attack the Ritual deck. There's also a Whip Flare that probably won't be coming in, but could have a spot where it is good. So yeah, actually quite unsure how he'll choose to sideboard, and will be interesting to see how that game plays out post board as well.
I'd like to highlight the most out of Gavin's sideboard is this one of Grafdigger's Cage. We saw it earlier when this matchup played between Brett Steele and Eduardo. It shuts off a lot of the deck. Kind of unintuitively, it shuts off both the Birthing Ritual, the card itself, but also Abhorrent Oculus, making those 2/2 manifests. It's a very powerful card, and the reason there's only one in the sideboard is it's also an Urza Saga tutor target. So that card, it is a one-on-one with quotations, because if Gavin wants to get it, it's pretty easy to get it, assuming those Force of Vigors aren't drawn. Maybe looking at an Emery matchup, as this one kind of gets slower and grindier post-board, you got to imagine that's something he's considering, but not a ton of cards that stand out outside of that Mystical Dispute in the Grafdigger's Cage as excellent in the matchup. But you saw game one, it looked, pretty dominant for Gavin, so you'd be hard-pressed to want to change too much.
Yeah, Emery, maybe being key at recovering once you lose multiple pieces to interaction, but notably it can't return the two best Force of Vigor targets, being Weapons Manufacturing and Urza Saga. However, it can recast a Kappa Cannoneer over again to fight through Mystical Disputes. And as we jump into game two, with Dom now on the play against Titan, it looks like he's on a Mull to 5, and his turn one is just a Wooded Foothills and pass.
This Amulet Titan is a deck that we've seen that could battle back from Mulligan. The bounce lands are a form of card advantage. They're really effective. But in these post-board games, it's a lot more punishing to take these mulligans because, in game one, you wouldn't really imagine that there are many hands that Aidan be okay keeping that don't have a one-drop. But post-board, there are a lot of them. There's hands with Blood Moon. There's hands with Wear Tear, Thraben Charm. A lot of interactive hands that Aidan might be okay keeping, and with him just saying Marsh Flats go, you got to expect that there's not just a 2-drop coming. There's got to be some amount of interaction for Dom, and that's a tough thing to push through on a Mull to 5 already.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we see, tanks on the Surveil with what looks like a Scape Shift in hand. Now, Scape Shift, one of the best cards at enabling fast kills, but against something that he knows a lot of Aidan has interaction. It's one of the more vulnerable combo pieces. But there you go, Simic Growth Chamber, unmulliganing Dom a little bit, returning a land to a hand, but it's a turn 1 tap land into a turn 2 tap land, returning a tapped land. So definitely a slow draw from Dom, but we don't know if Aidan will be able to punish.
Yeah, that's the big thing we're seeing here, right? Dom's hand might have some powerful threats like Escape Shift, but it's unclear if there's an Amulet of Vigor or Spelunking, and that hand that was picked up was a tap land. So if there's no Amulet or Spelunking, Dom, the problem with this Amulet Titan deck is that all the cards synergize with having these lands that come into play tapped, but if they only come into play tapped, there's a reason that no one else is playing Simic Growth Chamber in their modern deck. It's not a great Magic card, and compared to this kind of fetch shock mana base they're used to seeing, and this gives Aidan an opportunity to put on a lot of pressure, and there's tough to find a 2-drop that does that better than a Johnny Nicodle Pariah, which is hitting the battlefield.
Yeah, the only one even remotely close is Voice of Victory, both threatening 3 power on their own, but each potentially much more with the threats that Aidan might have to follow it up with. And we'll see if Dom does have an untapped land here. We don't know if he has a Spelunking, but if his only other land is that tap source from the commercial district that was fetched off the Wooded Foothills, then that would be a really slow development from him. But there are lots of lands that are allow Dom to have 3 mana on this turn, Crumbling Vestige or Forest or Waseju or any of them, and it's going to be pretty big for him to have one. But as it looks like, trying to get a peek at Dom's hand, it seems to be full of more of the expensive spells. I think there's Escape Shift, I think a Primeval Titan, but I could be completely wrong. But Forest is played, and then a Green Sun Zenith cast. Looks like for 2.
And the options for 2, you'd have to expect that that's a Aftermath Analyst hitting the board, another kind of value Aftermath Analyst.
Yeah, that's Aftermath Analyst may be trying to block the cat and kill it, but that seems tough against a Johnny. So yeah, I'm interested to see what he grabs here. I would have thought he could go for Arboreal Grazer, but then we would only see that Simic Growth Chamber tapped. And yeah, it is Aftermath Analyst. That's probably the idea behind putting that Wooded Foothills in Dom's deck, because he knows that in game 1, Analyst, just a combo piece. But in these post-board games where if he's mulligan, if he's grinding, that value Analyst is clearly something that he has right at the forefront in his mind, and he went for that Green Sun Zenith right away. So yeah, having his deck building set up to support that plan post board, that's probably why he has the fetch lands in his deck that maybe not very many other people have.
And there you're seeing that the secret text of that Aftermath Analyst, it's a 1/3 that's blocking, doing a bit of, preservation. And here we're looking at Aidan is going to need to have, some level of follow-up. If Dom is just
Well,
able to
the
untap and
plains
play
is
a
a tell.
land. Yeah, what do you
Fetching
think
a
that
second
follow-up
plane.
is?
Yeah, we'll see. It might not be the most effective thing to slam it right now, but it's going to be enough. It's going to, because Dom did play that forest, but yeah, it immediately removes 1 mana as that Simic Growth Chamber will only tap for red, so Dom won't be able to activate the Aftermath Analyst right away with another untapped land. So even though Aidan would probably prefer to deploy more pressure first and then Blood Moon on a more key turn, he goes, okay, I need to do this right now.
And kind of a bit of a nice, using Aiden's Blood Moon against him. That gives Dom the untapped red mana that he previously didn't have access to and gets his Ajani off the table, the Lithomantic Barrage. Dom is not really developing much of his own game plan, but nor is Aidan. And Dom has bought some time to hopefully make some powerful things happen, but we'll have to see what he
Is
follows
this
it
a
up with.
Flage?
That would be an excellent way to push through some damage here.
It is a Seasoned Pyromancer. Interesting. So this means that with any land, Dom can next turn and Orm's Chant and a Sacred Foundry discarded for Aidan. So a sideboard card that is effective against Titan's fastest draws, but maybe in this slower game, Aidan, Orm's Chant buys just 1 turn, and that's not enough when Aidan doesn't have any real pressure going on yet.
Yeah, Dom is sitting there. There's a couple lands in the graveyard. At least has the option of trying to sacrifice the Aftermath Analyst. If he has any land in hand, all of the non-basics in his deck will be coming to play untapped because of that Blood Moon. So Dom, we talk about it. This guy's been playing Amulet Titan for a very long time. It's not the first time he's seen Blood Moon hit the battlefield on his opponent's side, and he clearly has a plan to beat it. And the key oftentimes involves being able to not assume that your opponent's Blood Moon draws don't also contain a ton of pressure, and this 1/3 is blocking Dom's board or Aiden's board incredibly effectively.
Yeah, and one thing that's key about Dom's deck building is that he has 4 Green Sun Zenith in there and only 1 Forest. So this Aftermath Analyst, if he has another land, gets him to 6 mana, which would be enough to cast a Primeval Titan, except that he only has 1 green source. However, if he plays a 7th mana source after that, then a Green Sun Zenith can get a Primeval Titan into play through a Blood Moon off only a single forest.
And with just a Guided Souls from Aidan and 2 cards in hand, you do feel like Dom is going to have the time to, we call it manually put a Titan to play. Maybe getting these bounce lands in before and having some way to remove the Blood Moon, getting to kind of remove the ability that you're forced to bring them back to hand and cheat out some mana. Dom feels like he's in a pretty good spot, even though Aidan has the card that we've talked about as the most important one of the matchup in Blood Moon. But Blood Moon is incredibly effective when it's combined with pressure. But I don't see a lot of pressure.
You don't like this
From
attack for
Aidan.
3 is a lot of pressure? Get in for 1?
This is the hardest working Aftermath Analyst you'll see a long time. Second Blood Moon, and Dom just nods because he's like, yeah, well, who cares about Blood Moon? I have this 1/3 that's going to get me some more mountains. I already have my basic forest, and we'll see what's going on.
It's an Ocelot Pride. Now, this completely changes things because even if Dom is able to put a Primeval Titan into play, it's going to search for 2 lands that are mountains or forests. So the Primeval Titan, without an amulet and with double Blood Moon in play, is just going to be mostly a 6/6, right? And then Aidan will be able to easily overpower that with that Guide Pride combination that he's now established.
Yeah, we joked about Aiden's pressure, but we can see the power of that Boros Energy deck. It doesn't take a lot of cards to make an incredibly powerful board state, and this Ocelot Pride is incredible in the fair games here. Dom, you're hoping you'd see one of those couple Pyroclasms or a way to maybe get rid of these Blood Moons, because this board state that Aidan is presenting feels like it's a lot stronger than any of his fair game plans.
Well, it just got much, much, much stronger with that Ocelot Pride following up being play. We're correcting the number of cat tokens at this point. Yeah. 2 were created because we have the City's Blessing. 1, then it's copied because we have the City's Blessing. Dom with a Spelunking in his hand. That one just trying to dig for either some way to answer the Blood Moons or some way to answer Aiden's board. But he's trying to find a better option, as that would be a pretty weak turn to have that be your use to the green mana, but might be difficult for Dom to find.
If you're Dom Harvey in the spot, you might be thinking that your only out is to draw Force of Vigor to answer both those Blood Moons at the same time, because it doesn't seem like their deck is capable of doing anything powerful enough outside of maybe, drawing into Force of Vigor or Pyroclasm, and that might be why he wants to go for the Spelunking, because he realizes he needs one of these powerful cards. But
Yeah,
that does not
absolutely.
look like a Pyroclasm to me.
It looked like a Green Sun Zenith to me that he has, and that means that next turn he could Green Sun Zenith and Summoner's Pact in hand for Dom, and those are cards that are good once you have the Spelunking in play, but not because of these Blood Moons.
And this is threatening lethal for next turn easily for Aidan, and with a card like Goblin Bombardment, that would just end the match on the spot and send him to the top 4.
Yeah, we now have enough energy to give a creature flying, so it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11 damage on this combat. And then, so you're right, with those amounts of creatures, Bombardment ends it on the spot, and it's going to be almost impossible to recover from without a sweeper for Dom.
Yeah, it's looking tough, and the jumping of one of those creatures, Pyroclasm, is now no longer a perfect answer to the board. Even with Aidan just had a land, that would be probably just almost enough to threaten lethal again next turn with a grown Guide of Souls and 2 Seasoned Pyromancer tokens. And here come a lot more cats, and it feels like this draw needs to be huge for Dom Harvey, or else Aidan will be going to the top 4. And that's
there
a
it is.
second Green Sun Zenith, not it. Wow.
Convincingly defeats the master of Amulet Titan. Aidan Mirabelli moves on to our top 4. And this game on our backup feature match looks to be going a lot better for Eduardo, although there is a Grafdigger's Cage in play, so those 1/1s he has on board have to do some work, but nothing particularly powerful going on Gavin's side either.
Yeah, it's not looking great, but you kind of look at games where nothing is happening to be good for the Simic Birthing Ritual deck. You're the slower deck with more inevitability, with way better top decks as the game goes along, and you got to assume those are some sizable constructs coming in. I have to guess what those tokens are.
Oh yes, I didn't even clock them as constructs, but if that is, then that is certainly something powerful going on Gavin's side. And we do see a Urza Saga in his graveyard, so constructs by far the most likely thing for those tokens to be.
But you can see a Sink into Stupor in Eduardo's hand, a very powerful card against these gigantic tokens. And assuming Gavin's got no interaction, that would be a great way to buy Eduardo a lot of time. But otherwise, a Shadow Speared construct is going to get in for a lot of damage regardless.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see the block made. And Metallic Rebuke coming down on the sink, and the Ice Fang trading with this construct. So Eduardo was trying to remove all of the constructs right away. And the reason he cast the sink before that was to save 1 point of life, to shrink the construct by 1 to try to remove the other.
Yeah, and again, as we've seen from Eduardo all weekend, it's making these small little decisions that add up. That's a part of having success in one of these modern events. And you got to think he has to feel like he's turned the corner here. There's only one construct left, but there's a good chance that Eduardo's hand is full of cards that are just completely hosed by this Grafdigger's Cage.
I believe I saw multiple birthing rituals, which is, nothing in this spot.
Yeah, and that's the key card from Gavin Bennett out of the sideboard. You could have to assume that either that or the Shadow Spear came from that Urza Saga, and they're both putting in a lot of work here. If either one of those cards wasn't on the board, you'd have to love Eduardo's spot, but as of now, he might even though he's got a handful of cards, they don't have a lot of text on them. It looks like 3 birthing rituals, unless he's just too good at hand shuffling. But that is not a pretty sight to see against the Grafdigger's Cage.
No, and he could not have very much time to get out of it. That second Ice Fang Codal will be able to trade with the construct, but at the cost of taking a lot of damage. And at 7 life, at 7 life for Eduardo, he really needs to get something going as fast as possible.
And that is looks like, what is that, the 4th copy of Birthing Ritual? That is not what you want to see.
But he does draw another
And
sync, and I think a correction, that is a coiling oracle, not an ice fang, because we played a second copy and revealed it. So
but I believe
no,
that's a flare of denial, not the sync, and that's not something
oh,
that can deal with this construct.
yeah, very tough spot for Eduardo to be in here.
Yeah, you just looked at it with so many cards, and Gavin, it kind of looked like Gavin might have only had one card in hand, but he's got some good looking ones with you
Oh,
can see a Kappa Cannoneer. The Shadow Speared up construct is a huge threat. Eduardo's being attacked a lot of axes, and without an answer to that Grafdigger's Cage, there's not really an obvious way out.
yeah, it's going to be very difficult for him. I mean, even if it was just a sport, it might be hard for Eduardo to recover. But that Thoughtcast resolved, drew 2 more, drew a card for a turn. Looks like if it's a Kappa, that's a huge follow up, and then perhaps another Thoughtcast in hand too. And that means that Eduardo could cast a Wrath of God that comes from the skies, and then he still might be losing this game.
Just from the Warp Zone, just another powerful threat that you got to think Eduardo can't let resolve, but that's going to clear
No.
the way for whatever Gavin wants to follow it up with, and it looks like a Kappa Cannoneer.
Yeah, Gavin using that card as bait, but Eduardo couldn't afford to let it resolve either way.
And now I guess there's the option for Gavin may have to choose between developing a Kappa Cannoneer and attacking with this construct, and prioritizes getting into the red zone, realizing that Eduardo clearly has no answer to this big construct.
Yeah, absolutely. And if he has a Metallic Rebuke, it's not like he used his entire turn. Some life totals being checked. The power of the construct. It is a 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a 5, 6 power construct. So Eduardo needing to put the Shardless Agent in play in order to live. And Emery is a follow-up, which promptly eats a Mystical Dispute.
But this may be Eduardo's last draws of the tournament. It looks like a breeding pool, and I don't see a single answer in his hand. There's a Quantum Riddler in exile, but that's not enough. And Eduardo scoops it up, and Gavin Bennett, playing as an Affinity, moves on to the top 4 of this event.
Yeah, that Affinity deck, we've seen it a lot on stream, and this is just, well, we knew it was a tough matchup for Birthing Ritual. Eduardo's beaten it before, so never counted out, but this time the draws really did not line up against what Gavin had. That Grafdigger's Cage completely nullifying it, no Force of Vigor that would have gotten Eduardo back in it, and he falls in 2 games to Gavin Bennett, who will be moving on to the semifinals.
Yeah, it's just one of those games that shows the incredible, staying power of this Affinity deck and why Urza's Saga is one of the most powerful cards in the format. Urza's Saga not only created a board that Eduardo could not handle, but also tutored up a Grafdigger's Cage, which shut down his entire game plan, or perhaps it tutored up the Shadow Spear and he already drawn the Grafdigger's Cage, but those 2 cards working in tandem are incredibly powerful against this Birthing Ritual strategy. And, that's Gavin Bennett poked the right holes. He dodged the Force of Vigor, which is, part of the success of winning with this Is It Affinity deck, and he punched a spot in top 4.
Yeah, I've had this take for a long time. You talked about the power of Urza's Saga. Modern Horizons 2, a set full of very many powerful cards. In my opinion, the number 1 card from Modern Horizons 2, Urza's Saga.
Yeah, and that looks like a pretty reasonable take there.